Good evening, everybody. I'd like to call the May 23rd, 2023 Planning Commission special meeting to order. The Planning Commission is holding hybrid meetings. Members of the public can attend the meeting in person or observe the meeting on Zoom, online by visiting www.cityofarcata.org and following the live meetings link at the bottom of the city's homepage, or on the city's YouTube channel. If you are attending remotely, please be aware that the Zoom feed provides the closest to real-time stream. If you rely on the other feeds and you wish to make comments, please be aware of the time lag on those feeds. The first item on our agenda is the land acknowledgement. The City of Arcata acknowledges that the lands we are located on are the unceded ancestral lands of the Wiyot tribe. The land that Arcata rests on is known in the Wiyot language as Gudene, meaning over in the woods or among the redwoods. Past actions by local, state, and federal governments removed the Wiyot and other indigenous peoples from the land and threatened to destroy their cultural practices. The City of Arcata acknowledges the Wiyot community, their elders both past and present, as well as future generations. This acknowledgement seeks to aid in dismantling the legacy narratives of settler colonialism. Next is roll call. Staff, will you please call roll?
Commissioner Lehman?
Here.
Commissioner Simmons?
Here.
Commissioner Yurowitz?
Here.
Vice Chair Tagney?
Here.
And Chair Davies.
Here.
And just for the record, Commissioner Mayer has not joined us yet, presumed absent.
Thank you for that. We are joined this evening by Community Development Department staff Director David Loya, Deputy Director Jennifer Dart, and Community Development Specialist Gillen Martin. Next, we have public comment. During this time, people may make comments about items that are on the agenda. We will not be opening public comment on each item individually. If you have comments about items that are listed on our agenda today, please line up now behind the lectern. If you are on Zoom and you wish to make oral communications on matters that are on today's agenda, please raise your hand by selecting the raise hand icon on the right side of your screen or by pressing *9 if you are calling in. For those on Zoom, when it is your turn to speak, the clerk will unmute you. With that, I'd like to open public comment. Each speaker will have 3 minutes to comment. Feel free to state your name for the record. May we have the first speaker, please?
My name is Gil Friedman. Should I go on? Well, I don't know what's on the agenda, but I come here to speak for someone who can't come here to speak. L Street. I've lived in Arcata for over 30 years. My favorite street in town is L Street. I walk to the marsh on that street several times a week. There's bicycles on it. There's women with strollers with their children. It's a very peaceful street. There's no pollution. I think it'd be a crime to change that street. And the idea that you're going to make a one-way street of K Street and then another one L seems totally outrageous. It's not necessary. And when you put one-way streets in, like we have at H and G, they become like highways. The people speed down H, they speed down G, and if you're going to make a one-way street, that's an invitation for people to just drive faster. And it's more accidents, and I think it's a terrible idea. You may be destroying everything else in town, but please leave L Street the way it is. It's a wonderful street. It'd be hard to create a street like that. It's peaceful, it's got, birds, everything on that street. It leads to the marsh. So all I could say is I hope you'll keep L Street just the way it is. And the idea that you're going to make a one-way street out of K and a one street L, you're just making highways there. And people will be racing up those streets and all, and it's in the Creamery District, and it's going to be a lot of traffic and accidents. So that's my only suggestion. L Street can't come here to speak for itself, so I'm coming here for L Street. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your comments.
Hello, my name is Denny Dorset. I too want to speak for L Street and all the people who appreciate it, all the people who worked to make the Creamery District a reality. It needs to stay a green, linear park without cars in either or both directions. Keep it car-free in perpetuity, not just until the current landowners die or give up. I don't know if you can put language like that in the law, but please think about it. L Street is, not only is it lovely now, but think of what it could be without cars. We all know about cities who have closed a street in town, made a walking mall with great commercial success, indeed, as well as environmental and social success. So from Samoa to Alliance, let's make L Street a linear park, develop it, if at all, as a park. Imagine walking along L Street with a little cafe over here. I can get a cookie here. I can walk down the street and get a pizza, maybe a beer, coffee. It could be such a social hub. There could be music. It could draw the community together. I was in Tucson recently. They have a thing there called the Loop. It's a car-free circle around the city of Tucson for bicycles and pedestrians. People move to Tucson because of this feature. They just love it. Think about what we've got. Please preserve it. Please improve it. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments.
Good evening. Last Wednesday City Council meeting, the grant from the Coastal Commission that I've been talking quite a bit about the last year, that is a requirement for the city to address climate change, sea level rise, phase 1 of the wastewater treatment plant, where that has to go in the future, 50 years down the road. And I was always under the impression that it had already started last fall. That's what the staff member told me. But so I was pretty surprised that it was just getting approved by the City Council on Wednesday, which means we're really talking about, someone has told me maybe about a year and a half before you get that information that you need for your general plan updates, because it involves the gateway plan. It also involves your coastal element that's update. And it is like the most important bit of information you need. So you can't make a decision on all these important issues that are facing us if you're not going to wait for that information. So it seems like you're in quite a bit of a hurry to have this done by July. Not quite clear about that. The City Council has, I don't know, they mentioned some of their friends were frustrated with, not understanding the process. So it sounds like a pretty lame reason to mean accelerating everything. And I mean, like I'm pointing out, you don't need to accelerate it because you're not even going to have the most important information available to make that decision. I would guess it has nothing to do with what the City Council has to say. It has more to do with probably grant deadlines and money issues. It has nothing to do with what they said. So unfortunately, you're moving along quite rapidly and really should be addressing these issues and having the appropriate time. Unfortunate. Also, another big issue that has not been addressed that you had in this chamber is back in January, you had the Arcata Fire District. Haven't heard anything new about that. It's just other than talking. So you're still going for 7 stories. And the fire department was pretty serious about saying they don't want to see anything at this moment over 3 stories. And so that's rapidly moving along, and there's no answer to that. So if you're going to really take your job seriously, you need to be like bringing these issues up and addressing them, because how can you like go ahead with 7-story structures without these answers? Also, the amount of traffic that's going to bring in, the gentleman brought about the one-ways on H and G Street. We're talking about thousands of cars that are coming in. They're affecting people's health. It's affecting, you know, the noise levels, and it's not being addressed. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments.
Hello to commissioners and to staff. At the end of last time's planning commission special meeting, Commissioner Tagney referred to the comments made during the only time for public comments as excruciating. You know, the public comments have become relatively muted at these special meetings. There's one opportunity, and the message was almost like, I don't want to listen to comments. I do apologize, but that's really how I felt about it. On that note, Commissioner's compilations for May 23rd, 2023 policy pictures, who I have no idea, page 5 and 6, discussion items, 3D, 3J, streamside riparian policy areas. Policy comment, it should not be possible to just dig a ditch and then have it become a riparian area that must be retained in a natural state. It would be easy to impede development if this were true. I'm assuming the commenter is referring to a state jurisdictional wetland that was identified in the removal of a storm drain pipe back in 2015. The wetland was identified prior to digging the ditch and removing the storm drain pipe, and this is located on L Street corridor between 7th and Samoa. Cal Fish and Wildlife correspondence 2016 from Jennifer Olson, Cal Fish and Wildlife, to Allison Hunter, Arcata Senior Planner, Melissa Kramer, California Coastal Commission, Emily Venby, Environmental Services. Subject, reply, City of Arcata ditch maintenance coastal development permit, L Street 2016. And revegetation plan site with the Department of Fish and Wildlife biologist Jennifer Olson mentioned existing habitats for amphibians. The habitat does have some potential for breeding amphibians, so we should recommend preserving the open spaces and less shaded areas of habitat so potential eggs and laying and incubation sites are preserved. We recommend revegetating with native plants all along the banks, particularly for the newly daylighted areas, but preserving the less shaded areas by planting shorter species such as Juncus, Ophiuchus, and Patens. And then she finishes, let me know if you have any questions. Thank you for the opportunity to comment. Sincerely, Jennifer Olson. You know, this is an existing wetland. It's in the coastal zone. Removing the pipe, improve the drainage, and enhance the wetlands with vegetation improvements. So I personally find an oversimplified analogy of digging a ditch to impede development as just not really being on point. The comment panders to the gateway terminology of low-quality wetlands versus high-quality wetlands, inserted in an attempt to expedite mitigation in the coastal zone. Yeah, I don't really claim to be a wetlands expert, but I do try to do my homework on this, and that's all I have to say right now. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments.
Hi there, my name is Alex Boughton. First, I want to just echo my support with several comments that have been made last week by the public as well as here today in support of the linear park. I don't think we should make L Street a thorough street. K Street with proper changes would be sufficient, especially with our encouraging with new development to have reduced car traffic and in conjunction with improved transit. I don't think we would need to get rid of the L Street as it is or even improve it further as a park. I also want to strongly encourage limiting building heights to 4 stories. Seems like the fire department and the public and developers are all pretty opposed to allowing building heights of 5, 6, or 7 stories. So, and if development goes well in the gateway area, there's no reason to think that we won't see larger buildings in other parts of Arcata further down the line. So the need to go to 7 stories seems unnecessary and over the top. There was one comment from last week's meeting over in the Creamery District. Someone suggested for possibly reducing the need for trucks through the city is floating the idea of a warehouse on city limits for trucks to offload, allowing smaller vehicles to do in-city deliveries. I don't know how feasible that is, but I think that's a potential thing to look into, especially considering larger vehicles like semi-trucks are like 90% of the reason roads are damaged. So by limiting the amount of large vehicles driving within city might actually save the city money on road maintenance. I want to echo my support of Colin Fisk in a letter he sent to the city about what you're going over today on item D2B. There's a mention of within plaza area maintaining vehicle access through the future, possibly rewording this in some way to allow future car-free or open streets in the plaza area, because as it's worded right now, kind of prohibits that. I also want to echo what someone mentioned earlier about we're doing a lot of development in the coastal area, and maybe we should consider not necessarily abandoning it, but refocusing larger efforts in areas where either higher elevation or further inland where sea level rise in future won't really affect it as much. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments.
Hi, my name is Dwight Winiger. I'm a resident of the city of Arcata, and I wish to speak about the plans for L Street. I'm opposed to what is being proposed here of using L Street for the cutlet, but I'm also trying to feel that we could be proactive in terms of looking at an alternative, which I quickly laid out here with a marker of what I think there could be a possible alternative that needs some examination and discussion. I'm very much opposed to the abandonment of the railroad tracks within the city limits, because I believe they are a much more valuable asset to both the city of Arcata and to Cal Poly Humboldt for the future with rail banking, and for reasons that I can't go into with just 3 minutes here. It would actually be more of a white paper. But whatever even happens with the Gateway plan and with development over there, I believe that both the Class 1 bikeway and the rail tracks of rails with trails is a valuable asset for the future of Arcata and should be left alone. With the time I've got here, I can briefly describe what I'm thinking I'd like to have looked at, discussed, find out a few unanswered questions about the property that is along this route that I'm thinking of. If we were to not look at L Street, what I'm thinking, starting at the north, describing what I've got in front of me here, would be M Street, where K is turning into Alliance, going around that wetland area there and actually on the M Street right-of-way, crossing over past Bug Press into N Street to cross 11th, coming down along N until it starts hitting the railroad right-of-way that goes out to Samoa, and coming along there until it's evenly proportional of a line drawn down Q Street to come out to an intersection of Q and Samoa Boulevard with a signal directly at the new planned Cal Poly Humboldt and College of the Redwoods Medical Education Center. So I could give this here, pass it along to staff to show what I'm talking about, but that's my comment here with the time we've got.
Thank you for your comments, and Dwight and anyone else can feel free to email us with longer form ideas. Thank you for your comments.
Hi there. Good evening. My name is Perry Phillips, and I am also a resident of Arcata. Concerning the Gateway project and what others have said so far, I'm in agreement with much of it. The idea of a pedestrian area in L Street, the idea of keeping the height of the buildings to be 4 stories, but I also want to question whether or not, you know, how is the Planning Commission, has the Planning Commission in some sense become a facilitator for development? It seems to me that, you know, you're fast tracking this stuff during a period where the last 3 years there hasn't even been much of a chance to have face-to-face communication with, you know, people, and all of a sudden these plans have been already established that there was going to be this development, and now it's just a question of, can we put a check on it so it doesn't, we don't wind up with 8-story buildings in, you know, downtown Arcata dwarfing the creamery, and perhaps, you know, becoming a towering inferno that a fire department couldn't put out the fire of. That would be something, wouldn't it? So I don't know. I would like to question the constant drive towards development. Here's, you know, we start off these meetings with the, you know, this notion that this is we ought land. I find that very ironic, because certainly, you know, if Native American peoples had been here, we wouldn't have any of this development. Some of it hasn't been for the best. And it's an awfully huge expenditure of energy and materials to create these buildings. Will we love them after they're built, or will we all be asking ourselves, how did that happen? You know, go to Boulder, Colorado and talk to somebody who's, you know, was in Boulder, Colorado 30, 40 years ago before the development, and ask them, well, do you love the new city or what? You know, was that great or what? We built a bunch of new buildings. Is everyone happy? Thank you.
Thanks for your comments.
Good evening, Patricia Kamyanika. So I'm sure you're all aware there were 2 different meetings at the Creamery. The first one on May 10th was actually put together by a business owner at the Creamery, because they wanted to get the community together, the residents and the business owners of the Creamery district together to discuss primarily L Street and how it would affect business if it was built into a trucking route, and how much a linear park would contribute to businesses in the area. So they set it up. I attended both that one and the other the next week on the 16th that the city led. And the first one was actually really refreshing. We got a lot done. We discussed a lot of different options. We answered a lot of questions. There were over 50 people there, and it was, we discussed rails with trails, or, you know, rails to trails, and just kind of that whole area. And it gave me hope that people were waking up and realizing what was going on, and how much of an asset that corridor is right now, and how much more it could be. The second meeting on the 16th that the city led, there were a little over 30 people. I counted 33 at one point. About a third of them left because David Loya told us that we could not talk about the linear park, that it wasn't pertinent to the Creamery district, I guess, which was problematic because most people were there to try to express how much it would influence the business and the residents, and it was a major concern. Yeah, so that's just kind of a little bit of update between the two. I just kind of wanted to throw it out there from the community perspective. It was very disheartening. One community member told me it was just another dog and pony show from the city. So anyways, yeah, we're really asking for the linear park. The Creamery district's businesses would be enhanced. The residents, I mean, it would, if we're going to bring in that many people, it would be just a really great thing. So anyhow, if you want to contact me about more of the ins and outs of both of those conversations, I know you're going to get one perspective probably tonight, but maybe reach out again to those community members and those businesses, because they're really screaming linear park. So anyways, thank you for all your time. Thanks.
Thanks for your comments, Patricia.
evening. I'm Fred Wise. We have 3 planning commissioners whose terms started after Gateway Plan came out, December 2021, a year and a half ago. So we'll have 4, a majority. I can appreciate everyone's insights, but I also appreciate the long-term involvement of the longer-serving commissioners. Occasionally I go back on Arcata 1 and look at articles from a year ago, year and a half ago, see how they read. I encourage the commissioners to do that. I put 3 of them at the front. One is the letter from Andrea Tuttle, which I think is as pertinent today as it was written 15 months ago. Letter from Nick Lucchese of Pacific Builders, one of our preeminent builders in Arcata, 16 months ago. He wrote, "You have not asked us what we want. What this approach represents is a top-down vision for the future of Arcata with a belated attempt at getting buy-in from the public," and more. The third article that I'll point out is an article that I wrote a year ago called Let's Move Forward. It includes a request for a draft of the form-based code to be delivered immediately so we can chew on it. What is Plan West up to? When are we going to get the environmental impact report? Or are they doing the testing that's required of them? Articles about affordable housing and opportunities for home ownership was a request for discussion on that, and a request for Plan B for the L and K Street couplet if it turned out that L Street would not become part of the couplet. As you know, the Transportation Safety Committee ruled very strongly for the 4th time against having L Street be part of that couplet. The meeting at the Creamery on the 16th, I wrote to you about this. I regard it as a substantial mockery of what the commission had asked for. It asked for input from the people in the Creamery, and instead they were 6 pre-chosen topics. As Patricia mentioned, about 1/3 of the people, or almost half, walked out. All the notes, the meeting had a lot of value. I'm not saying it has 0 value. It was good. There's a lot of information from staff. All the post-it notes are transcribed on arcata1.com, so you can read them in writing. There are, the articles I wrote on that meeting proved very popular. There's almost 400 views so far. I have an article in the Med River Union, it's out now, about what we've seen and not seen over the past 18 months. And I'd like to see an updated schedule of what we've accomplished over this last few months. I get the idea that anything that is in the past on the schedule, we're not going to bring up again, such as home ownership or affordable housing. Maybe we'll bring it up in the next 6 months. Thanks.
We appreciate your comments, Fred. Thank you.
My name is Gil Friedman. I'd like to make one other point.
Gil, we already heard from you this evening.
Can I make one point?
One time, we have people waiting online as well?
We do.
I would encourage you to write us a letter if you could.
Can I maybe 1 minute? 1 minute?
I'd really like to.
Can I make 1 minute point?
The reason why the chair is asking you to speak only once, Gil, is because if he lets you speak once, then he should, or twice, then he needs to let everyone speak twice. So in a matter of fairness, I think. Go ahead, Jane.
Good evening. It's Jane Woodward again. I did not prepare written comments for tonight because I had 2 bloomin' busy days. But the reality of it is that I think in your last meeting, well, a couple meetings ago, you discussed the need to fix K Street. And in light of postponing, even though you did a tentative discussion of voting in favor of having the couplet, which was, I believe, a 4-2 vote, you said, let's go forward with all due speed on fixing K Street. Now, I listened to part of the discussion last week on what was happening from the city engineer on K Street, and the only thing I heard with respect to all the issues that had been presented as options on K Street by the Planning Commission was the fact that they were talking about putting in one of those lighting strips that goes across for a walkway. So I didn't hear about any of the other issues that they're being planned for restriping and fixing the parking on K Street or other ways of slowing down K Street. So I'm wondering if the Planning Commission is going to make affirmative recommendations that these be done and maybe put a tentative hold on L Street instead of saying it should be part of the plan. I think you should reconsider that in light of what kind of feedback you're getting, and look at how you can develop L Street into a beautiful feature for the city, which you can make a center for public passageway and recreation, and in combination with what we already have there as an entertainment and arts center. We're keeping that, but we can elaborate on that, and you can put buildings around it where you have cafes, you have residences, things like that, but you have access to those residents from the east-west streets. Anyway, I fully agree with almost every comment that's been made to date by the people who are in person. I'm sorry I can't be there, and I will try to get more of my ideas in writing to you. Thank you so very much for all your work. Good luck.
Thanks, Jane, for your comments. You have more commenters waiting, David?
Yep. Go ahead, Lisa.
Good evening, commissioners. This is Lisa Brown. This is a regular scheduled meeting week. So I am going to provide the commission with input on a matter not on the agenda, and you will soon see why. Over the last several months, I have become increasingly concerned over what appears to be a dampening of community input, and yet I do believe that this commission values accessibility, inclusiveness, embracing, considering, responding to the public. In the perceived demand for efficiency, implementation of the bike rack has made it nearly impossible for the public to determine when an item will be discussed. This is troubling, especially for hot ticket items such as tonight's rezoning topic. It is akin to inviting someone to catch a ball while a bully continually kicks it out of reach. And yet, what I want to speak to tonight is probably the most egregious example of expediency gone wrong. Special meetings every week, where oral communications disappears and public comment for items on the agenda are held at the beginning of the meeting. This is an ill-advised strategy. Holding special meetings every week is not in compliance with the municipal code. There is no time certain for meetings of the Planning Commission in the municipal code. Time certain applies only to the City Council. The time that your commission meets is up to the will of the commission. In fact, all commissions and committees decide by vote at what time to meet. There is no amending of the municipal code to change meeting times for your commission. What is mandated in section 2209 of this code is as follows. The Planning Commission shall hold regular meetings twice monthly as set by schedule established by the commission. It is imperative for the commission to immediately return to regular meetings twice per month with the resumption of oral communications for items not on the agenda, as well as comments for items on the agenda during each agenda item. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you for your comments.
One more. Go ahead, Melody.
Thank you. This is Melody Meyer. I'm an Arcata resident and an Indigenous woman. I just wanted to address and comment made earlier this evening, which suggested that local tribes would oppose further development on Arcata. I believe it's inappropriate to speak on behalf of tribes, and I believe the comment also overlooks the current efforts of local tribes in developing and constructing housing both in Eureka and Arcata. And it's important to note that Native Americans face significant housing insecurity. And I strongly believe that increased housing options in Arcata would greatly benefit Native American students in particular. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments.
That's all we have.
All right. Thanks to everyone who provided comments this evening. We all appreciate your participation and your input. We will now move on to item 3, which is business items, and we have 2 business items today. The first is to approve our Planning Commission minutes from our special meeting, May 9th, 2023. And staff informs me that there is a correction that needs to be made on those minutes. Staff, do you want to describe the correction briefly before we see if anyone else has any reason to discuss those minutes?
Yeah, just briefly on packet page 3, the minutes from May 9th under item 3C, where we discuss approving the Planning Commission minutes of the special meeting of April 27th. We need to add to that, so correct these minutes to add the words item 3B on the April 27, 2023 minutes was corrected to add the language that Commissioner Mayer asked to add, which is other rezoning recommendations were not considered but were postponed to a future meeting. So that sentence appears on the April 27 minutes that were adopted now, and so we're just recording into the minutes that that motion was made and that they were changed.
Okay, thank you for that. Does anyone else have any comments on those minutes, or can we get a motion to approve as corrected by staff?
I'll move to adopt the minutes as the, I guess that's the consent calendar at this point, or is it not? No, it's business item, as amended by staff.
Great, we have a first motion. Can we get a second?
I'll second.
We have a first and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
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 This motion passes. And our next agenda item is to consider a recommendation to the City Council on general plan updates. And as always, can we begin with the staff report, please?
Yeah, and I'll keep brief. I have some words to say about the design element. I'd like to turn it over to my colleague Gillen to talk about the health element. And then just to remind the commission that after we get done with these 2 new elements for your review, well, the health element is new, the design element is revised, but new to your review, that we'll dig into the land use designation map, as we've noticed and discussed at our last meeting. And then I also want to just talk briefly about the meeting that we had at the Creamery building last week. So the design element is an element that focuses primarily on the look and feel of the city of Arcata. It addresses, residential and commercial and industrial designs. And we tried to modify that based on a lot of the discussions that we've heard from the Planning Commission up to this point about some of the items around, community character and those kinds of things. And so you'll see a lot of edits around that. We also tried to move a lot of the detail into the zoning code. When the general plan was adopted, the land use code had not been adopted. And so the folks that worked on writing the general plan wanted to put a whole lot of detail about how to address certain design specifications, certain design elements into the general plan. That detail is a little too detailed for a policy document and has subsequently been imported into the land use code. And so that's another area where you'll see a lot of amendments in the design element, where we've struck in a lot of that detail because it's in the land use code, the zoning ordinance now. So looking forward to getting into those. We do have the discussion guide up on the screen here, and we'll jump into that shortly. I want to turn it over to our community development specialist, Gillen Martin, to describe some of the exciting work that we've been doing with the health element.
Hello. Yes, thank you for your time. As David mentioned, this is a new element to our general plan. Arcata has never before had a health element, a health chapter. It's made possible with funding from NorCal for Health and specifically their project director, Amber Weir. With that funding, the city worked with Change Lab Solutions, an Oakland-based nonprofit that uses law and policy to advance health equity nationwide. And their managing director, Eric Calloway, produced the first draft of Arcata's health element. So from there, we took that draft that Eric produced and we spoke with local health experts to learn about the specific challenges to Arcata that we should be thinking about, challenges and opportunities to individual and community health here. We spoke with Robert Pitts of the Wiyot Tribe, their Health and Human Services Director, Tori Starr, the Chief Officer at Open Door Clinic, Liz Lara, the CEO of UIHS, and also Sophia Pereira and Laura Weiss from the County Public Health, who are working currently on updating the County Health Improvement Plan. I also wanted to say that this element is informed by the equity listening sessions that we had throughout the fall and winter of 2022. We were working on the second draft of this element as those were being facilitated by equity partners. And in those, we heard from individual community members, specifically disabled community members who had been unhoused, and community members of historically excluded racial groups as we drafted this element, and their individual challenges in living a healthy life in Arcata, whether that's securing a medical appointment or accessing healthy foods in their neighborhood. And I wanted to remark on three primary themes that came from the drafting of this element. The first, I'd say, is just the amount that the city's housing shortage affects individual health and community health. From providers, from all the health experts we spoke with, they made clear that our housing shortage in Arcata is their #1 barrier to recruiting and retaining medical staff in this area, whether that's primary providers or staff and assistants. And from individual members of the community in those equity listening sessions, many who had been unhoused, some who had experienced housing discrimination due to their race, due to the fact that they had children, others who had bounced around housing situations, experienced housing instability, and generally had trouble securing housing. Across the board, their mental and physical health were being affected by their housing situations in Arcata. The second point, I just wanted to remark on health equity. We heard specifically from Change Lab Solutions and from the county that this element should take into account neighborhoods and groups in Arcata that experience divergent outcomes when it comes to health. Once again, do you have healthy food in your neighborhood? Do you have access to transportation that can get you to medical appointments? Just looking neighborhood by neighborhood and group by group, whether that's age, ability status, race, at divergent outcomes for different groups and neighborhoods, and how we as a city can ensure that our work looks to reduce those and or improve those. Finally, I just wanted to say, and I know that we all know this, especially you all know this, but just that while each of our different systems in Arcata may have a different general plan chapter, transportation, housing, health, the user experience of these systems is really interconnected. So if you have access to healthcare, it doesn't matter much if you can't get yourself there. If you have a job, you also need to get yourself there. So just ensuring that as we are planning for each of the systems the city has a responsibility for that support our individual and community health, ensuring that those systems work together and consider each other as we plan for our future. So I just wanted to huge thank you to everyone who provided their time to the drafting of this element, and thanks for your time and your comments.
Thanks, Gillen.
And the only thing I'll add about the health element is that you'll see that interconnectivity that Gillen was discussing included in the health element. At the very end, we have policies that are intended to be dropped into other elements throughout the general plan that were originally drafted as health policies. That we wanted to make sure that there was an emphasis and a focus throughout the general plan with these policies. And we can point that out to you as we get into them. Okay, I just wanted to close the staff report by discussing a little bit about the work that we did to bring the community meeting to the Creamery District and hopefully provide a little bit of clarity and context for that meeting. We acknowledge that some people were hoping to be able to discuss the K&L Street couplet. question was directly asked, you know, are you going to discuss this? Is this one of the topics right at the outset of the meeting? And it was not. It wasn't one of the topics that staff went to discuss with the community at that meeting. And we did give a venue, a space to have conversations that weren't for the purpose of the meeting, so that we can make sure that we captured all of the information that people wanted to talk about and bring that back to the Planning Commission. So if you look on table 1 of the framework, which is on packet page 10, just to remind the Planning Commission and the public, the Gateway Specific Concern column is a distillation of the table that you all developed last year, late last year and around November, that were based on what you were hearing from the community, the topics that you wanted to hear more about, that you wanted to dig into more detail, you wanted to hear from experts, or you wanted staff to find out more information. And you may recall that when it came to displacement of businesses, what would happen with the Creamery District, and what would happen to the Creamery building itself, those were important topics that you put on your concerns and solutions set. At the time when you developed this in November, the Planning Commission was intending to hold a special meeting in the Creamery District, find a location in the Creamery District somewhere so that you could go to folks living in that area and have a meeting where they were at. As we started getting into this year and the timelines for this work were established by the City Council, and you were trying to prioritize how you were going to spend your time to meet those challenges, you took another look at that commitment to hold a special meeting in the Creamery District, and you said, look, this is going to come off the list. We're not going to have time to do this. We don't have the logistics. It's just not going to work. So you took it entirely off your list. Instead of losing those topics, the Planning Commission asked staff to have a meeting in the Creamery District with folks to get information about specifically those topics. So we went to, had a meeting at the Playhouse on the 16th, and we went to that meeting prepared to ask people to provide a little information, because there's a lot of misinformation out there, so to provide a little bit of information on what the plan actually says about these topics, and then to try and hear from folks, you know, if they had concerns or recommendations for how to address those concerns. And, you know, I think that we got a lot of great information. We included that as Exhibit E to your packet today, with a brief write-up on the main takeaways, but then we also included in Attachment E the photographs of the you know, comments that were made that either staff recorded or that people were allowed to, you know, able to record their own words onto Post-its and then stick them into you know, different subject matter areas. And so I wanted to reframe you know, the purpose of that meeting, because the L Street issue, because the K&L couplet, because the linear park, you know, were not topics that fell under that concerns and solutions subset for that meeting date. We asked folks to put comments about that onto an other ideas page and to bring those other ideas to you. So you'll see a lot of comments that people made about that. It's clearly an important topic for people. But we also collected a lot of the information that you did ask us to collect and brought that forward to you as well. And so I guess just in summary, you know, what I think our main takeaways as staff for that meeting in terms of the topics that you asked us to address were that, you know, folks are, you know, generally speaking supportive, the folks that came to this meeting anyway, were generally speaking supportive of the concept of community benefits program. A lot of the community benefits that came forward in that meeting are already included on the community benefits list, so that was good to see some reinforcement there. We had some folks who had previously been very skeptical around the permitting process once they understood it better and they heard how that process was going to work. You know, they said things like, oh, I'm still not completely thrilled with this, this permitting process. I would rather see them be discretionary, everything discretionary, but you know, I'm okay with this. I feel more comfortable with it. And so I feel like there was a lot of, you know, a lot of understanding that came out of that meeting. You know, people are not universally on board with what is in the proposal, but I did see, you know, some shift in movement. Clearly, L Street, as you heard tonight from many of the public members, L Street and capping building height at 4 stories was also a recurring theme that came up at that meeting. So I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have about those. I also want to remind the Planning Commission and the public that the Planning Commission is really driving this process. We're bringing forward all of the information, excuse me, that the Planning Commission requested for discussion. And it's up to commissioners to decide which of this information you'd like to dig into in more detail in this forum. We've created a framework to allow you to get through the policy work that you absolutely have to get through in order to make a recommendation to the City Council. And then there's a lot of other information here that we're covering that has to do with the topics that were in the concerns and solutions subset. And there may be other issues and matters that come up in the meeting that you can start to pursue as well. And so while you may not have discussed every single item that you've seen come through in a staff report in great detail in these meetings, we are bringing the information towards you or to you in these staff reports. And the idea is that if you'd like to discuss them, that you will bring them forward and then we'll have that discussion. If you're satisfied with the information that's in here and you're ready to move on to other topics, you're welcome to do that. If these items that are in here that you haven't discussed are important enough for you to bring up and have a further discussion about after you've made your recommendation in July, all of these items are still on the table. We would like to structure them in ways, as we have done with this framework, that you have productive conversations about them, that have an endpoint and a decision-making process, as opposed to just being open-ended conversations. But that's, again, just for the commission, you should feel fully emboldened to make any comment or question or bring any of these items that you see in the staff report forward for discussion. And with that, I'd love to turn it back over, and if there are any questions, or we can move into the framework.
Okay, thank you for that breakdown, and thank you, David and Gillen, for those presentations. Let's begin this evening looking at the design element. We can start with the consent items. Do any commissioners wish to remove anything from our consent list here, or any objections to any of the changes here?
I'd like to remove number 1.
Okay. Let's pull 1. Judith?
I'd like to remove the comment on D-1A.
I'm sorry, which number is that, Commissioner Mayor?
Policy D-1A and D-6A.
Under number 7 here?
No. This is the comment with regard to shading of adjacent structures.
Which bullet number is it under the consent items?
If you can move a little bit slower, I can see this came to us in digital form. It did not come to us on paper. If you go to the comment, I don't know what your number is, on policy D-1A and D-6A on the same topic.
$17. It's D-6A is 17. Is that the one you wanted to pull?
Yes. The same issue also appeared in policy D-1A, and I guess it's not on your number 17.
I think she's referring to 14.
And incidentally, if you send us material in digital form very close to the meeting and we don't have it on paper, and we choose not to bring a computer to flip through it ourselves, we have a great deal of problem identifying your numbers. I'm identifying what I'm seeing on the document that I do have in printed form in front of me.
And I'm sorry, is this the one that you're referring to, D-1E? Or I thought you said A.
It's the same topic that appears in two different policies. One of them was on consent, one wasn't. They need to be consistent with each other, and so if I'm pulling D-6A and D-1A, they're basically the same policy.
Well, can we just pull the one that we've identified and start?
It sounds like if the other one is on policy pitch and not on consent.
I don't know where it is, but I would like to pull that one that is on the consent. Which
Okay, we've got it identified.
Okay, so then is there anything else that anyone would like to pull off of the consent? Otherwise, then let's hear what you've got to say, Matt, and then we'll move to Judith's question.
Yeah, just the very first one, I like the language incorporate better than encourage, and I would suggest we leave it as it was. Sorry. For the very first consent item, D-1G, the plan originally said incorporate. I'm pretty sure that's old language from 20 years ago, and the suggestion is to change it to encourage, and I think incorporate is better than encourage, and I would like us to leave it as it was.
Does anyone have an objection to swap encourage for incorporate?
Seems like a great idea.
Or the other way? No concerns?
I'm the one who made that suggestion. I thought encourage was, I'm okay either way, frankly, but I thought encourage was a little more positive.
Does anyone have a problem with encourage versus incorporate?
I think so let me just make sure I'm tracking the conversation correctly. I think Commissioner Simmons was saying basically reject this change, so turn this red.
Oh, I see. I misunderstood. Then what does the rest of the commission think about it? We're going to need to weigh in one way or the other.
I'm good with incorporate.
Joel?
Yeah, I agree. I think I like incorporate.
Judith?
I think encourage is, it includes a positive connotation and a policy orientation that allows for the specifics of design and specific locations. So I like the idea of encourage.
So this might be a good gradients vote just to resolve it.
Sure. Let's fingers here, gradients of agreement.
So 5 is I disagree completely and I would vote to block it. 1 is I agree completely and I embrace it. 3 is I don't have a strong opinion one way or the other. And then the other 2 are sort of in the middle, but leaning on the other side.
Can we just so we're all on the same page, the reality is that what incorporate was the city suggested text, right? And by design, that means that we will for sure incorporate pedestrian and bicycle in circulation, and a softer answer is encouraged. Is that what you're after, Matt?
Correct.
Okay. All right. Well, so if we like the original text of incorporate, then that's what we're voting on, or are we voting on the change?
We're trying to get a sense. I think we have 3 so far that are in favor of keeping incorporate, and I will just vote with that group to push us into a majority on let's reject this change and keep it with incorporate.
Okay. Moving on.
Judith, do you want to discuss the item that you pulled? Sorry, I can't see anyone in this direction at all.
Yeah, the original language on policy D6A, which I'm now looking at. The original language was the siting and design of buildings shall promote energy efficiency and consider solar access, balancing development needs with solar access. And the consideration that has been eliminated in that language from the former language, which was in our policies of the past few years, referred to minimizing impacts on nearby uses, and I was referring to minimizing shading of adjacent structures. I think the two places where this similar policy came up in D1A and D6A are really separating solar energy issues from other aspects of shading. And I feel that it's important to minimize shading of other nearby uses and structures. So by isolating a solar energy issue from other aspects of shading, I think that we would be opening the door to shading people's windows, shading their vegetable gardens, shading their basic living in ways that this very limited treatment does not address. And so I'd like to get that word minimize back in there.
Might that make it really hard to build almost anything? Like, because ultimately anything you build is going to shade something.
No, I don't think it would make it impossible to build almost anything. I think the weak language of saying consider solar access basically says, okay, we've considered it, going to build it anyway. There's nothing more important than building, therefore we've considered this issue and goodbye. Minimizes a stronger form of consideration, and obviously minimize is not an absolute also. It is something that allows us to consider it as well, but with a clear emphasis on minimizing impacts. The consider has no emphasis on minimizing impacts. We've considered it, done. So I feel that the wording with regard to minimizing impacts is important because it indicates the direction that we wish to go with respect to impacts on neighbors.
And are your concerns, Judith, about the impacts? It's a little confusing just in the sense that, are you saying that it would be, the concern would be that solar would be prioritized and it would be the installation of solar that would be creating the impacts?
Yeah, in a sense, yes, that is.
Okay, thank you.
So the solar panels themselves.
Yeah.
Not just the solar panels themselves. There's a lot more to solar access than panels, and it does include all kinds of aspects of construction. I think maybe we have some folks here that can speak to that better than I can. But when you simply refer to solar access in terms of solar panels, I think that's much too narrow. When we're talking about energy efficiency, we might actually be talking about, providing continued access to windows for solar gain or wall surfaces for solar gain. But Peter might be able to speak to this better than I can.
Go ahead, Peter.
I feel that saying solar access includes the impacts that you're worried about. I mean, it just says solar access. It doesn't say access to solar panels. I think the wording is fine the way it is. as it's proposed in this change.
Okay, thank you, Peter. Matt, did you want to weigh in on the wording and whether you where you fall on this?
Yeah, so I was the one who suggested the new wording, and it was actually for exactly the reason I think minimize is too strong when you're talking about balancing, current existing structures versus new structures that will also potentially have efficiency, and that consider is more of a sort of a balanced middle between the two, that we shouldn't be overly considering existing structures over new ones.
So you're in proposal of the balancing development needs with solar access language.
I propose this language.
Great. Joel?
Yeah, I just have a question for clarification purposes. Excuse me. I'm looking at D6A, and I don't see that. So I see D1E and that language that Judith is talking about, but unless I'm missing it, I'd like it pointed out. Where is that in D6A?
This is new language. Are you looking at the element itself? Or are you looking at the
I'm looking
design?
at a hard copy that seems to be redlined. That was I printed out.
So yeah, it's on packet page 28.
Okay, it's D6A7, I believe.
It is. That's what I'm fighting to. Judith.
Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay, which is on packet page 26. And in that language, the word minimize has been retained. And I would like to retain minimize on the other policy as well. The two policies probably should be consistent.
Okay.
And the other, I guess the other thing is for those of you who are new to the commission and to design review in the city of Arcata, the issue of shading is one of the extremely hot button issues that has come before us. And it's one of the issues about which neighbors who might otherwise be just fine with a large structure right next to them lose any possibility of support over. And it's also one of the things that we've been able to convince developers to make adjustments on. Pull the structure back 8 feet to minimize solar shading of neighbors. Cut it off a little bit, modify the roof line, but it is very important to have that word minimize rather than consider in order to make clear the orientation that we want to have toward neighboring structures and uses. And this has come up over the time I've been on the commission repeatedly, and I don't think it's going to disappear with the next 20 years emphasis on
Thank you, Judith. I think you've been really good at making that that point clear for us. Dan?
Yeah, I'm thinking back on the Sorrel Place discussion. Shading was a giant topic. There was a lot of presentations, a lot of shadow diagramming done. And ultimately, that project provided 40 units of affordable housing. And had we, minimized it, maybe we would have gone 3 stories and the solar shading would have been a lot less and there would be 30 units instead of 40. So I feel like we're on a slippery slope of if we suggest minimize, does that mean to the neighbors of an applicant or of an application for a project that, hey, your code says minimize, you can't go up that high. Look at the solar diagrams. And what we deferred to was state law. Generally on that one, I remember a lot of discussion about state law, and ultimately you can build up to the parameters of, you know, that was 45 feet and they were built to 45 feet and the shade happened the way shade happens. And there wasn't a whole lot we could do about it. Had they wanted to do something beyond the zoned building heights, then shading might have been an easy thing because we would have been tasked to interpret a give that you know, would have created more shade. In that situation, they built to the 45 feet. So I like consider more than minimize, just because it minimize feels like it's giving ammunition to saying, you can't shade my building.
Got it. Okay, thanks, Dan.
Can I respond to that? You brought up an example, which is exactly the example that does respond to minimizing. The building was pulled back in order to minimize shading to a development across the street. Without the policy of minimizing shading, I'm not sure that it would have been pulled back. It would have been possible to just say, okay, well, you know, we've considered it done. But because minimize is in the pre-existing language, I think that that's one of the things that really push the city to try to, you know, kind of mediate in that decision, and the developer did change their design fairly significantly as a result.
Chair, can I? I'm sorry, Chair. Can I just kind of bridge a couple
sure.
of gaps here? To Commissioner Tagney's point, Vice Chair Tagney's point, you're absolutely right. This is policy language, and the policy language is has to be consistent with the zoning language. And so the zoning language that was adopted by the city says currently that you can build to 45 feet, and that zoning language was interpreted by the decision makers who adopted that language as to be consistent with the language as is currently written to minimize. And so if someone comes in to build something and it's 45 feet tall, they are minimizing the impacts of shading and solar access on their neighbors. That's the current law. What you're considering today, again, is policy language, and you can use this policy language either as written or as proposed to develop standards that will implement this policy language in the way that you mean it to be implemented, or in the way that the City Council means it to be implemented. When you look at the specific example that was brought up, the Sorrel Place, that was not a situation in which we looked at the existing language and said, hey, look, the general plan says minimize, so we're going to cause you to move this back. That was a voluntary design decision that the applicant made based on a number of different factors. The Planning Commission would have been completely well within its rights to have approved the project at 45 feet right up against the sidewalk as it was previously designed. And there were a lot of, the developer was amenable to moving it. The last point I want to make is that that project, in part, was the impetus for the design guidelines that you'll see in the form-based code for this gateway area. The idea of pulling the buildings back, of stepping them back on the upper floors to try and create more solar access for adjacent neighbors. Those are exactly the kinds of concepts that we've pulled into this. And so, you know, the gateway area plan has language around this, and you know, this language could be around, you know, can also be consistent with those ideas as well.
Thanks, David. Joel, do you have a clear feeling one way or another on this language issue? Question, rather.
Well, yeah, I am concerned that minimize might be a little bit, might restrain development a little bit too much for my taste.
Okay. I'm comfortable as well with the balancing language, so let's keep that. I think that's the majority vote.
Okay, and then I think what we did, I think Commissioner Simmons was correct that it's D1E. I was hearing D1A. I just wanted to confirm that that's the other policy we were talking about. It has that same consider and minimize language.
That looks right.
So I'm going to turn that green as well. Okay. So then I'm assuming at this point,
We're good to pass the rest of this consent list.
Yep.
Having heard no other requests for discussion. So let's move on to the first of our policy proposal items. Policy pitch. Okay, whose is this? Policy D2B.
this, Peter, was this yours? No? Undergrounding utilities? Oh,
Yeah, I believe that's mine.
Okay, let's hear your pitch, Joel.
Let me refresh my recollection here for 1 second.
So this is around undergrounding utilities. And you said undergrounding utilities provides better aesthetics.
The way well, my printout of the draft element had a prior, the prior language was stricken, which had an D2B10 require undergrounding of utilities, and that was, but I'm a little bit concerned that my printout may not reflect what's in the packet for some reason. But if that's the case, I was just
no, I think it does.
Okay.
Here's the
yeah, I did not know why undergrounding of utilities was being eliminated from the updated general plan element, and I thought, I was assuming that maybe the word require was too strong. That's why the suggestion was to strike it entirely from the general plan. So I thought to soften it, just to add encourage, because I think just for purely aesthetic reasons, not seeing overhead wires is a good thing. I realize there's a cost to that. So that's why I used the language that I proposed.
Does anyone have comments or questions about that proposed language change?
When it was discussed in the past, there was a substantial cost that was a consideration. Is there staff input on that? I feel like we addressed this at some time in the past, and we would all love to see undergrounding. I totally support it, but if it's going to kill projects or the whole district.
Yeah, I think that was the discussion before, and I think to Commissioner Yodowitz's point, softening the language and putting encourage as opposed to require may, resolve that. It still leaves the window open. I mean, I think everyone would agree it'd be better to have utilities underground.
Does anyone have a problem with changing that to encourage versus require? Okay.
Okay, but it would be reinstated instead of the cross out with encourage.
It would be reinstated with the language change to encourage. So made. Item number 2.
This was also mine. This had to do with the downtown district. In the prior language was, can you go back up, David, 2E? The height, scale, and mass, volume of new buildings and additions to existing buildings shall be compatible with other buildings in the immediate vicinity. And that entire sentence was stricken in the current draft under review. And I think it's important to consider height, scale, and mass of new buildings and additions, and that impact on other properties. Now, maybe a form-based code already will do that, and I assume it does because it limits height, mass, etc. But I don't see any reason not to use kind of soft, language, take into account. as a high-level policy that the, decision makers need to take those things into account.
Okay, any other commissioners have questions or input on that proposed language change? Go ahead, Matt. Okay, Judith?
Yeah, I think that that's an appropriate change. I had actually suggested a change to that policy as well, slightly different language, and I referred to visual organization being harmonious rather than consistent with, and I feel that is somewhat of a milder term. It's a little bit difficult to say how the objective standards would operate there, but again, this is something where perhaps the discretion of people who are familiar with an area and who will be affected by it would actually come into play. And it's, yeah, I think either of those different terms would be fine, but.
Other commissioners, go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, so I guess I have a question for staff, which is, I think right below where your cursor is, there's a note about how this language is not sort of objective enough, and that's been causing problems. And I appreciate that take into account is different than consider, but it's sort of another not so objective language. And so I'm curious from staff how that would work.
Yeah, we had made this recommended change based on conversations with the commission over the last couple of years, and through the review of this project or this plan, to try and move away from community character and terms like that were more harder to define. Again, I think that the same point that I just made, if you want to have some policy language and then you say now we've adopted this zoning code and this zoning code implements this policy language, as Commissioner Yodowitz pointed out, that's perfectly fine. But we did try and eliminate these policies that you have struggled with in the past, like compatibility and those sorts of things, where you've seen a project that meets the code otherwise, but you don't see any other two-story buildings around it. There's only one-story building. So does that mean you can't approve a two-story building? So I just wanted to put that note there for context. The length of the note has nothing to do with the strength of staff's opinion about it. It's just the context around it.
Dan?
Yeah, I sure support Matt's point about us moving towards objective standards as much as possibility. And although I appreciate that sentence and it sounds just right, and we all want things to be kind of compatible and harmonious in areas of the community, but it does leave us vulnerable to some difficult conversations later.
My thought is, yeah, I did not like the word compatible because that is subjective. But if height, scale, mass of new buildings and renovations and additions need to be taken into account, they can be taken into account in a form-based code. And it almost goes without saying that's what a code does. So, but I just liked to see that language as kind of a policy, and maybe it's a toothless policy, but I don't know.
Does anyone?
That's my thought.
Okay, Judith.
Yeah, I think that all along here we've been making a distinction between the policy level statements that go into the general plan and the standards that go into the land use code. This is one of those cases where we have a high level policy standard that can be implemented through an extremely detailed and arguably objective set of standards in the land use code and in our design code. And so I don't see that this opens us up to any problems whatsoever, any more than consider did in the previous items wording. So I think that that would be a reasonable high-level policy statement. And yes, of course, it would need to be implemented through objective standards in our code.
So you're in favor of take into account?
Take into account, there are a number of different ways of saying it. I just want to keep that high level policy
Ultimately,
statement.
I'd like to get a vote on this language. I don't want us to bog down. There's a lot we still need to get to, including the mapping, which at a certain point, I'm going to feel like I need to cut our discussions off so we can get to that item if we're kind of screeching to a halt here with this one. So get a sense about thumbs up for take into account. Matt, Peter, Igualmente, Joel. Okay.
Okay.
Yep. Okay.
So I'm going to note that, as Commissioner Mayer pointed out, there's another policy that deals with this exact same policy in a little bit more detail below. So we'll incorporate those, or point out the difference, and then you can decide whether to use this language, the other language, or both languages.
Great. So item number 3 regarding the Arcata Plaza. Whose item was this?
I think this was Commissioner Mayer. I think for some of yours, I highlighted the yellow to indicate where the changes were because it was hard to track. And so what you'll see on these are the underlined strikeout from the original with additional underline and strikeout in yellow. That's the proposed change.
Excuse me, what I had proposed, and I have it right here in front of me, and you've got it in the track changes version that staff sent to you as well, was D, whoops, okay. I'm on the previous page. Okay, my comment was on D1B, emphasize Arcata Plaza area as the central community focal point, and then the language I suggested proceeded to the Arcata Plaza. I'm looking here at my version of what you modified, and so it's a little bit difficult to decipher.
Do you have a view of a proposed version that you can just read through so we can make sense of what it would sound like?
Yes, and it was D1B, emphasize Arcata Plaza area as the central community focal point. The Arcata Plaza shall somehow this got deleted in what I've got here. Anyway, architectural and other design elements shall emphasize the importance of the Arcata Plaza as the city's center. And it kind of, and I guess, yes, for commerce was in there.
As well as main focal point for commerce?
And then it continued, but I only wanted to emphasize that we needed to continue to emphasize the plaza as the community focal point and the city's center.
Okay. Do any commissioners have any questions or concerns about that change? Go ahead, Matt.
So I'm completely fine with central as opposed to main. It looks like you also want to delete the buildings fronting on streets around or facing the Arcata Plaza shall be multi-story.
Yes, that's correct. Currently, not all of the buildings there are multi-story. It is a historic district. Basically, what you're saying is that those buildings would be slated for destruction, in effect. And I don't want to promote a policy that would basically say that our historic district is going to have half of the buildings slated for destruction.
I think they should be multi-story.
Okay, Dan, did you have a comment?
Yeah, and I think that encouraging future development to be multi-story would be great, and it makes sense. I can't imagine any of the existing single stories. I mean, if they were non-conforming use, that would be okay forever, as if they maintain their building. There is no avenue of forcing anybody to vacate, destroy, and rebuild. So, but I like what you said, the central, I like that. You're now wanting to throw in the multi-story, so that language needs to get in there so we can vote on this. And then I like how you phrased the end of it, Commissioner Mayor.
And
but
can I
we
get
still
some,
need to tighten up on the language.
Can I get some clarity too, Commissioner Mayor? Did you not want this stricken as a community's focal point?
It's above. Community focal point is in the previous sentence, so that's repetitive. So I said the city center for commerce.
So you did want this stricken? That's my question.
The second, the place where it appears second.
Yeah, so right here where it's highlighted, you want this to remain as is?
Yeah,
Okay.
I want community focal point at the beginning, but we don't need to use the same terms again. The city center is.
Thanks for that clarification.
Yeah.
Joel,
As far as the buildings fronting on the plaza go, do we need that language in there at all? Do we need to include that language? It seems that people who own the buildings, people who might propose changes to them, might actually see their own economic interest in building bigger buildings. Let's leave that to them. This is a historic district. It does have features that include the buildings that are there today.
I'm fine with that. If you want to take it out, I'm ready to vote.
Joel, where do you land on that?
I think it should be stricken. I agree with Judith.
I agree with Judith on this item. So item 4D-5B, single family residential design, whose proposal was this?
I think that was probably me. Yes, that was me. And I proposed some language.
From the staff perspective, this language is fine. I would just recommend that you use something less stringent than ensure that accessory dwelling unit design complements surrounding development.
Something more aspirational.
What do you have wrong with ensure if complements is the term that follows it? That seems fairly mild.
I think staff is suggesting strive for versus ensure.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the challenge with this, again, and with a lot of these design policies, it's really hard to stay away from, sort of the slippery slope of subjectivity. And, number one, and that's sort of identifying that, how design complements surrounding development. Again, this goes back to the exact policy that we just had. And the reason why I suggested, tamping down the word ensure a little bit, going with something a little lighter, is because the state law has, for accessory dwelling units, has something to say about that. And so there are limitations on the, the types of standards that we can apply to accessory dwelling units. So
Okay,
that gives us the flexibility.
I'm okay with strive for as long as the rest of the language remains.
Peter?
If strive for is there, it sort of lessens the effect, but access to direct sunlight, I'm afraid, is also going to be restrictive and prevent development that we want to encourage.
That's the intention of this. It's to protect access to direct sunlight for people who have it now.
Well, if there's an empty space on a lot where an accessory dwelling unit can be built and it's in the shade, we don't want to prevent it from being built.
I don't think we could use that as a standard. You know, I'll just be frank. And I think that, you know, with the shading issue, this is true of many of the issues around aesthetics, et cetera, that, you know, you really are balancing, you know, property rights. And, you know, currently someone who owns a piece of property has the right to develop on it. You're limiting their development rights by, you know, adopting policies that require that they can't cast shade off their property. So that's just something that you need to take into consideration.
So strive for, if it just says strive for, I mean, could we vote on that?
Where's the commission land if the language is strive for?
Can I add another thing? I think if the commission is going for strive for, which I'm okay with, I think it's perfectly all right to keep a reference to access to direct sunlight there. After all, this is a weak thing. It's aspirational. And I think that if one property owner wishes to deprive their neighboring property owners of something that they cherish, they should strive not to do that. It's a weak term compared to the one that I proposed, and I think it would make that striving to preserve the sunshine in my garden a reasonable thing.
Okay, go ahead, Joel.
Yeah, I think that we need to add another strive before the word retains, and just so it's clear that retain is not a mandatory policy, but it's part of the striving for.
I see the strive for accessory dwelling unit that
and strive
complements and retains privacy, access, direct sunlight, and a sense of appropriate scale. So that strive for modifies all.
I think it modifies everything.
As long as it's understood that the strive also represents the phrase on the other side of the word and retains privacy, access to direct sunlight.
The Oxford comma. Is everyone, let's take a vote on this. We're getting stuck here again on this strive for. Is everyone okay with that language? Does anyone have a problem with strive for, given the observations of staff? Okay, Peter? Judith?
I'm good with it.
Okay, Joel? Dan?
Okay, so I was just tinkering with the language, and I put in a semicolon here and a list to show that strive for design that complements, retains, an appropriate sense of scale.
Got it. I think we're the majority approved. Let's adopt and move on. And can we have a timeout, just David? And can you give me a preview of coming attractions before we get to the map portion of our discussion, which has been pushed off so many times, and we're at 7:07 or something this evening, and I want to make sure we have time for that. So how much more do we have before we're going to organically arrive at that point?
There's 2 more policies in design, and then the health element has 14 consent, and 3 policy pitch. Do you want to see if you can jam through these pretty quick?
Well, I mean, it always comes to a hard choice about what gets jettisoned, and my concern is that the map discussion has gotten kicked off so many times that I would like to clear that off. So let's try and be a little more concise and quick in our discussions and move quicker to a vote if we can on these items. What would be great, I think, is if we could finish this stuff and get to that mapping within the next sort of 20 minutes or so, 20, 30 minutes. I don't know if that's possible, but that's what I would like. Take us to the next item.
So the next item is streetscape design. I don't remember who proposed this. This is, I think, a decent policy change. Just wanted to make sure that folks had a chance to talk about it if they had concerns.
Go ahead, Peter.
I'll point out that under consent, we already approved a change to D2B, and that was, we added the phrase including the possibility of car-free streets, and we added number 10 to the list, consider the possibility of car-free streets. So that's already, we've already approved that. And
correct. Those will be included, as well as whatever else is included from this policy.
all right.
So I don't know who did this one, but the change is just adding non-obstructive to the furniture. We already did encourage underground, right? Putting that back in. And then, is there anything else?
Well, adding, I mean, we had already added a number 10, which is car-free streets. We should make, strongly encourage undergrounding, number 11.
Yeah, staff will incorporate whatever gets adopted.
Let's just make this consistent with previous language adoption.
Question on clarity. Provide where was that? Sorry. Number 4, incorporate street trees in appropriate locations. I just want the FYI that I hope you all picked up is that it takes a 7-foot sidewalk to have a street tree in the sidewalk, and Arcata has very few of those. Like K Street, they're 5.5, and most of the town they're more like 5. So unless we do something ambitious with sidewalks and or some kind of division lane between pedestrians or traffic and pedestrians that's a street tree corridor, unless we do something ambitious, there's not going to be very many street trees in any of this.
I'm hoping we do something ambitious and have much wider sidewalks.
Okay, this one came in as a picture, so I can't actually turn this stuff green, but I've turned everything around it green, so that'll remind me that you approved it.
Okay, item 6, policy D2E design criteria. Criteria for new structures and additions. Whose was this?
This is Judith's, I think, and this was the one that we amended above, and instead of harmonious, we adopted the take into account thing.
So let's
I
just,
think that's already addressed.
Yeah.
So you're fine turning this red and not
Correct.
Including this language, okay.
Actually, excuse me, there was a part of that in the rationale down there that if we're going to eliminate that, it referred to the requirements for elevation drawings and photographs rather than elevation drawings or photographs. And I feel that given that we're dealing with digital documents and context, that it actually is important to have both.
Do we need that level of detail in the general plan at all? I mean, what
That
applications
that
need
could
to
go
be
in the
filed?
design code. Yeah, it can go in the design code, in which case we should eliminate it here. But when we do put it in the design code, require both. When we're talking about context and neighbors, we need both, and one or the other is not sufficient.
Other commissioners have shared that concern regarding photographs as well as drawings.
Didn't I also just hear a suggestion that we could eliminate it because it should be in other places?
Yeah, I'm fine with it being eliminated here, but showing up in the land use code design standards and application requirements.
Let's do that.
Staff perspective.
I would say let's save the discussion for a later date. If you're willing to eliminate this policy now, then we can talk about it later, so I don't drone
Let's
on
do that
and bore you.
and keep moving.
I think this was Commissioner Mayer's as well.
It's basically the same set of issues that we have addressed in other contexts, and I think that we are asking the city to analyze the potential for new development to obstruct views of things that we value, views of the bay or the ocean. And I think that the original language referred only to hillside areas, and I've suggested limiting that to any public street in Arcata. And again, this is fairly weak language asking us to do that analysis and not absolutely to preserve those views, but not to allow development without having first analyzed its impact on those view sheds.
Joel?
Yeah, I was always under the impression that views are not a legally protected right, and as much as I appreciate views, if that's the case, I would not be in favor of putting anything in the general plan that provides any new legal rights for views. I think that could impede development.
It may indeed impede development. It probably would impede some development that perhaps should be considered twice. And therefore, I'm asking that we include high-level policy language to analyze those potential impacts. CEQA's case law has recently, been pretty clear that it's not an absolute right either. CEQA is going to require that analysis regardless. I think that we can make a slightly stronger statement in our area, which has very strong values in terms of what we see from our streets.
Other commissioners want to weigh in on this item, Matt?
I'd be opposed to this change.
Peter?
Yeah, I would too. I see it as a burden that is not necessary.
Okay, thank you. Dan?
Yeah, it brings up a lot of concern for me too. There's a lot of Arcata that could claim that as a reason to say that any tall buildings, even a 4-story, is blocking a view shed.
Yeah, I share that concern.
I feel very sad to hear this decision. And I'd like that to go on record. We value our views of the bay. We value our views of the ocean. And what you're saying is that in considering development proposals, we're not even obliged to look at that.
I think
brief comment or reaction to that. We value them, I agree, but we don't own them. And that there is ownership, view easements. There's cities that have prescribed that in legal context, and there's properties that have them. But nobody around this view shed has that opportunity, and to pretend that they do with any language is flirting with something that we can't provide, that we can't back up. And it feels like it's just going to create a lot of really difficult dynamics for something that we can't back up. Like if somebody does block their view, well, we considered it, but they are built anyway because they can build to whatever level gets passed through the zoning.
Okay, what's our next item?
You're on to the health element consent items.
Okay. Is there any commissioner that wants to pull any of the items on the health consent list for discussion, or can we pass this group as a block?
Could I just ask that CX safe be spelled out? That change was something that I had suggested, but I'm noticing that there's terminology there that's not defined.
I'm sorry, what do you want to do?
CX safe is terminology that's not defined, and I'm wondering if that's something that can be spelled out.
Yeah, so safe, convenient, connected, and multimodal transportation, there's something that's not defined in here.
CX safe.
CX, it's going in the circulation element. This will now be a M since we're changing it to mobility, and X means that it's the policy number. We don't know which one yet because we haven't put it in there.
Thank you.
So, and that's same for this one, CX targeted. We'll be moving that into the circulation. Sorry for that confusion.
Any concerns about any of the language in these consent items from anyone on the Planning Commission? Okay, not seeing anything. Let's pass that consent items in health and move on to the pitches. Policy pitch items, transportation. Page 217. Whose was this? Go ahead, Peter, fire away.
I suggested this change because I think the original statement is just wrong. Active transportation is not inaccessible for many Arcata residents. That's just not true. It can be difficult, that's true. Yes, there are, and as staff pointed out, there are times when bus service is inaccessible, but not always. And I just think a little softer language is appropriate.
Thanks, Peter. Other commissioners have comments or any concerns about that proposed change? Okay, seeing none, let's adopt.
Okay, and I'll note for the commission's consideration that staff will continue to let the council know that we think this language is appropriate as is. I think there are some real equity challenges that we're not recognizing in adopting this change. That's not, bus service was an example. There's areas of Valley West you can't get to on a bike trail, for example. There are areas in our community that are predominantly black and brown that have inaccessible options for active transportation. We think this is a way to call that out and identify it as a specific systemic problem that we as a community can work on, as opposed to making it more of an ambiguous, is it the person's problem? Is it the city's problem? Whose problem is it? It's difficult. We have no way to fix that. So I just wanted to kind of note that. I also want to note that the equity partners that we're working with right now are also currently reviewing this language, and so they may have some comments back on that. So with that, I'll turn the screen and we'll move on.
Okay, item 2, regarding alcohol misuse. Matt?
This was mine. Just the language in blue, promoting increased public transit access, availability, and frequency near bars and other establishments that serve alcohol in order to discourage drinking and driving.
I think it sounds good on the face of it. I think that making this a shall is probably going to, may not make it through the entire policy change this way. I think it's a good option for, improving safety. I just don't know that we can commit to it. There are many factors that drive bus frequency and availability. So.
How about if it said, the city shall consider the impact of land use policies and programs on alcohol misuse, including promoting increased public transit, so something like that.
Yep, that's reasonable.
Is that okay? Is everyone okay with that kind of language? Great. Reduce drink driving?
See, I'm going to make that one. I think our code was purple for staff needs to come back and work on those.
Okay, number 3, amend implementation measure H7. And is this our last pitch piece?
I think that was mine. I think I understand that the reason that language was included there was to highlight underserved neighborhoods. However, when you're talking about health data, the general public will not be able to make those comparisons themselves unless they have access to the full set of data, in which case the analysis will then highlight the higher concentrations of poor health outcomes in specific neighborhoods. But when one talks about data, it's really important to report on all the data, not only a portion of it. And so that, I guess, in a way, is my academic hat coming into the picture. The other thing was the recent developments that threaten health, I think, is an important bit of policy language to add, because we're not only looking at negative outcomes that have already taken place, but at threats to health that we need to be proactive about.
Can I ask what you mean by developments in this context? Like events, or are you talking about buildings?
I might be talking about events, budget cuts, health program changes from the federal or state level. I might be talking about the threatened closure of a healthcare facility. I might be talking about the limitation of particular services that could no longer be available in our city or region. And that's why I use that very general language.
Yeah, okay. Because this read a little ambiguous to me. What about changes in programs, policies, or the environment, or something like that?
Programs, policies, services, and yeah, something like that. I tried to be concise.
Programs, policies, and services.
But I was thinking in particular of the potential closure of a healthcare facility in our area, or the refusal of particular healthcare facilities to offer particular services that people here need, in particular women's health care and gender-related health care that one of our major facilities is refusing to provide.
I agree, and I would say that we're not only really concerned with the recent changes, but imminent or future ones as well, right? It's not just recent things. It's the kind of ongoing situation, and so we might want to find language. Yeah.
That
left out a word. Sorry.
That's great.
Okay, everyone good with that? Okay. So adopted, and does that take us to the end of all of our pitch stuff prior to?
It does.
Okay. Then with great fanfare and at long last.
Okay. So yeah, let me just zoom out real quick here.
Thank you, Gillen.
Okay, so we have the land use designations map before you here. At your meeting a few weeks ago, you dealt with a couple of the changes. This one over here, that's AR zoned and IL zoned properties to zone for residential high, and this one over here where you changed some of the, recommend change for some of the zoning on the south portion instead of to residential high to residential medium. And so zooming out, we're going to just start at the north end of the city, looking at the changes that are proposed. And I believe commissioners can just address the changes, if they have any, that they'd like to address. And I would offer that, following the same format of trying to be succinct, put forward your position, and banter it about before making a quick negative vote if possible, and then moving on. So here we are in the Valley West. Just to give context, here's Giantoli, Highway 299, 101. We're in that area right there. And the proposal is to take areas that are currently zoned industrial limited along Giantoli and commercial general. This is the shopping center here, and turn those all into commercial mixed use. That would allow for a higher density of development and a mix of uses similar to what we're doing with the Gateway area, but with existing zoning type. And recollect that we've discussed changing the commercial mixed use standards in the land use code to allow for broader flexibility as well.
Go ahead, Judith.
Yeah, in the question that I raised about this, in most cases where we have residential uses that would be allowed in an area, a fairly large area, for those large areas, we've required planned development permits. And I'm wondering, would a planned development be required on these large parcels if they were to be changed to a CG zoning classification?
No, not according to the current land use code. For large residential parcels over an acre, planned development is currently required. Staff is actually going to bring, when we get to the land use code changes, some proposed modifications to that. But there's no requirement for other zone types to have a planned development.
Okay, so in this case, with the CG designation and the current uses of those actual areas, there could actually be residential uses developed there. And so I guess I'm wondering about making those changes and then backing off from some of the types of planning tools that we've had in the past where residential development has been involved.
Currently under commercial general doesn't require a planned development either.
Right, but in the past, the commercial general also hasn't had much of a focus on residential uses, and today in commercial general, I think that residential uses are a possibility given current state laws. So I guess I'm wondering there what would actually be required other than looks good, let's stamp it.
I guess I'm not sure what the concern is. I'm sorry, I'm not tracking you really. Is your concern about what would happen in the event of a change or in the event that there wasn't a change?
So this area, I think, is in one of the infill opportunity zones. Is that correct?
It is.
Okay. So presumably in these infill opportunity zones, we're going to have something resembling the kind of form-based code that we have, that we will be developing for the gateway. And it's difficult for me to envision the actual process there that would change something to commercial where we are going to have residential in there as well. And
this change would allow for mixed-use development, which is similar to commercial with residential on top. It allows for a slightly higher density, and it gives a little push for that infill opportunity zone to get started before we've had the ability to go through the process of developing a form-based code, so that there's access for development potential in that area now. We can evaluate it now. It can be combined under our existing EIR for this general plan update work, and it'll, gives us a head start on that work. It would be subject to the same kinds of review process that any commercial mixed-use project would be, afforded under current state law or local law. If it wasn't subject to one of the streamlining provisions from state law, then it would have to go through a design review process. And it would be subject to the standards of the commercial mixed-use zone.
Okay.
Okay, and are we talking about Exhibit 2 as well as Exhibit 1 here, or just Exhibit 1?
Just Exhibit 2,
Okay,
where the
just
commercial
Exhibit
mixed
2.
use is proposed.
Okay, so the other question there, does that include the current school bus area? The bus lot?
I'd have to double check. I believe it may.
It looked to me like it does, but
it's a little hard to tell on the fly. I'll keep looking, but is there a specific question about the bus lot?
Yeah, that's an area where we've had a lot of diesel and lubricants and, interesting chemicals associated with large vehicle maintenance over the years. It's basically a kind of an industrial site, and given the types of residential uses that could be enabled there, I'm wondering about what the rush is to change that zoning before we have an actual set of projects envisioned. I'm also kind of wondering about where the buses are going to go.
Go ahead, Peter.
Wouldn't a investigation as to whether there are dangerous chemicals involved, wouldn't that occur before any development would happen?
I don't know.
I think so.
Yeah, if there's a site where there's, where there have been industrial activities, there'd have to be an investigation. And the bus depot or the bus property is right here, so it is included in that area. In terms of, I don't know how to resolve, the questions in terms of why the rush. I wouldn't say there's a rush. I wouldn't characterize it that way. What I would say is that there is a significant housing crisis, and so what staff did was looked at all the areas where there's potential for upzoning and providing for additional residential development, And that's what we've prepared for you here today.
Okay. Having heard those concerns, does anyone else have concerns about this zoning proposed redesignation? No? None seen. So can we move on to Exhibit 1 then?
Exhibit 1 is currently under commercial visitors serving. It's the most restrictive zoning type we have. And the proposal is to change it to commercial general, which would allow more uses for those property owners. I think the idea behind commercial visitors serving is that you ensure that you have an area where hotels can be built, but hotels can be built in commercial general, they can be built in commercial mixed. There's a lot of other areas where you can build commercial visitor serving uses, and so we're proposing to change those.
Matt?
I'm just curious about the rationale between commercial general versus commercial mixed, and why we separate them.
I don't have a strong grounding for why those were differentiated. So if the commission wanted to change this entire area to commercial mix, there's very little commercial general left after all these changes. I don't know that that's a bad thing. I mean, I think what we're recognizing is having mixed zones creates more vibrant communities. So would certainly support that.
Peter?
Could you change it to commercial mixed?
I can't, but you can.
I think that's a good idea.
Prefer a change to CM versus CG. Okay.
So that means most of that Valley West area would all be CM. Huh? Yeah.
Joel, thoughts or concerns?
Yeah, no, I have no concerns. I think that's a great idea.
Okay, I would support that change to commercial mix. Judith, did you want to weigh in? Nope. Okay, thank you. Whichever exhibit is next on the map.
Okay, Exhibit 3 is the Happy Valley area. Excuse me. And the proposal is to change this all to industrial limited. If we do change this to industrial limited, sawmills would not be able to locate here. And so, even with this recommendation, I think we need to keep it open to, to consideration. There aren't a whole lot of other sites where sawmills are allowable. And one of the concepts behind, the keeping this area out here as industrial is so that we can relocate some of the uses that are in the gateway area or other areas that might get displaced. And so I would say with this one, this is a little bit of a soft recommendation. We may want to ultimately retain some industrial general in the Happy Valley to relocate the sawmill that's over on the Winkle Floyd property. But this is the current recommendation.
Judith, go ahead.
Why rezone this now? It seems as though anything going into an industrial limited zone could also go into an industrial general zone. And
no, if it's industrial general, it can accommodate heavy industrial uses, high impact manufacturing.
Right, but it can also accommodate other industrial uses with lower impacts, can it not?
It can, but the other way around is not true. So if you make it industrial limited, right now it's split zoned. And if you make it industrial limited, then that would eliminate the possibility for heavy industrial uses there.
I'm all for the industrial limited, personally.
Joel?
Yeah, my concern is if there are businesses in the gateway area that are going to relocate and want to relocate to Valley West, where are they going to go? I don't know why we need to make this decision immediately.
I don't see a need to rezone that immediately either, and especially since we do have a rather large industrial general area that isn't being rezoned, and that does now host the Cannabis Innovation Zone, and that is probably being underutilized. I just would wait to do rezoning in this smaller area behind with extremely limited access at the moment.
Matt, Peter? Middle of the road. I too am just a little bit concerned about losing a possible destination for some of the businesses that are in the gateway area. So, Peter?
Are there examples? Can you point out examples of industrial concerns in the gateway area that would be,
well, specifically,
that would not be allowed in industrial limited?
Like the sawmill that's in the Winkle Floyd property in the Beryl district. If that needed to relocate, there's not a spot for it if it changes from IG to IL.
So what I would suggest, because currently the way that the split zoning is on that property, it's not very functional. It's not based on property lines or anything like that. I would suggest the Planning Commission recommend Exhibit 3 as is, with the caveat that retaining a portion for industrial general for relocation purposes as necessary would be your ultimate recommendation. I think by the time we're implementing these, we'll have knowledge around whether that relocation is required.
That seems like a reasonable compromise. Is everyone okay with that? Okay, let's adopt as suggested and move on to Exhibit 4.
Exhibit 4, you've already, not necessarily this composition of this body, but the Planning Commission has already weighed in on previously when we were doing the local coastal program work. These areas around Alliance running here and on Spear running here are inside the coastal zone, the stashed line running around this here. And currently has residential low and residential very low along this side, and what we had proposed in the local coastal program was to turn these into residential medium. There's actually quite a bit of potential vacant parcels, underutilized parcels in this area, and could create quite a bit of housing for folks. And at that time, when you looked at that, when you were looking at the local coastal program, this is the recommendation that you made then, and so we included it here on this map.
Does anyone have concerns with our prior recommendation for residential medium? Judith?
Yeah, I don't recall that discussion recommending residential medium. I know that our policies in general look to gradually change uses from our AE designation. From AE to residential medium is quite a jump. I'd also point out that rezoning to residential medium for these parcels is in effect a windfall for their owners. And their owners, to my knowledge, have not even requested that windfall. And this is a recipe for land speculation, which then increases the cost of development if and when it ever occurs, and actually would not necessarily provide more affordable housing. It might provide more housing, but by pre-zoning this particular location next to next to two AE parcels, you're basically giving a gift to some future development or developer who will benefit from the land speculation that will ensue.
Okay. Dan?
Yeah, Commissioner Mayor, do you recall, did you lobby against this decision months ago or whenever that was? I don't know.
I can't remember lobbying against that one. I remember there was an issue with a location a little bit to the south of that. And that involved some landlocked parcels.
I mean, I think it's difficult for us to take into consideration the possible financial impacts on individual landowners in this area. And I think if I keep my thinking regarding opportunities for infill and addressing the housing crisis, this seems to me like a good place to make a shift to residential medium.
Okay, then we have other policies that we probably need to change to make that consistent, which has to do with the gradual transition from AE to higher density developments. And we have not made that policy change to date, as far as I know.
Matt?
Go ahead. I was just going to point out, if you look at the total land use map, we actually do have a spot where we transition directly from AE to residential mixed. It's in Sunnybray. And I don't think anyone is looking at Sunnybray and thinking, oh, it's a sudden jump that is, you know, out of character and can't be allowed again. I think it's okay.
Let's take a vote about go ahead, Peter.
I just want to say we can't. We really need housing, and the fact that some landowners may make money because this gets rezoned and we can build houses, that can't be a reason for us not to do it.
Yeah, agreed. I'm in favor of this zoning change. I'm looking for a vote in favor or against from other commissioners. Okay, so adopted. Exhibit 5.
You've already dealt with. Exhibit 6 you've already dealt with. Exhibit 7 is the Northtown area, which I may advocate for renaming Midtown. There's a whole lot north of Northtown, or Uptown, or I don't know, something like that. Anyway, Exhibit 7 is Northtown, and it's commercial general currently. These are very small lots, and they're impossible to develop under the densities at commercial general. And the proposal is to change it to commercial mix to allow, again, that more vibrant streetscape with higher densities.
I would suggest you make that recommendation about renaming to the same people that call San Francisco Northern California. And good luck with that. Questions and concerns about this zone change? Judith?
Yeah, I think if we're going to make this zone change now, we should also plan to have a specific set of objective standards in our land use code before the development under the new zoning could take place. Mainly because in this case, we do have some very considerable issues around height. I hate to say the word, around parking, around curb cuts onto the street, around shading. And so this is one of those areas where if we are going to do this rezone, it needs to have its own set of objective standards put in place before the rezone actually kicks in.
May I ask a point of clarity? Are there height limit differences between commercial general and commercial mixed?
I would have to double check. I don't have that off the top of my head. But I also wanted to say that just to be clear with the language, I know we're sometimes using the vernacular and saying rezone. These are not rezones. These are land use designations. The rezones would happen in the zoning ordinance at a later date. And to Commissioner Mayer's point, you know, we would have the opportunity. In fact, staff is going to encourage that we take a look at not only design standards, but also the other land use limitations for these areas.
Right, and in the written recommendations that I sent in, which I don't think were distributed, and which did have different exhibit numbers, I actually recommended that a form-based code be developed for this area specifically.
Okay. Other concerns about this change from CG to CM by planning commissioners? Negative vote? No concerns? Okay. Next exhibit.
Exhibit 8 is the downtown area. It's got a little holdout parcel that's right here. And the recommendation is to change it from residential high to central commercial to flatten out that area. I'll point out that this entire area, Uniontown, downtown, and this little bit of residential medium here is all in one of our infill opportunity zones, and we would propose that we'd come back and take a closer look at some of the potential for form-based code or other alternatives there. But for right now, the proposal is to try and make a couple of small changes in here to upzone.
Is the blue square the plaza?
It is.
So this is on K Street or J Street?
Yeah, this is on J. I'm sorry, this is on I. Here's J and there's K. Oh no, I'm sorry. I was one off. That is J. That's J.
I have a question there. Does that include the that alley between G and H and 5th and 6th? I'm kind of disoriented on the scale of this map. No, the north-south alley. Well, I mean, there too.
So the proposal is just for that one outholding property to be conforming with the rest of the zoning?
Correct.
And do commissioners have a concern about that one property being brought into conformance with the rest of the zone for that area?
Can you point to that, please?
The property itself?
Yes.
Yeah, so it's on J and 6 here. Got too many buttons to push. I keep pushing the wrong one. It's this property right here.
So it's the back corner of the same property that has the cannabis
yeah, here's
businesses.
HPRC.
Got
There's
it.
Sorrel Places over here.
Got it, got it. So again, does anyone have concerns about this property being made to conform with the rest of the zoning? Just that property to be made consistent with the rest of the zoning?
Hold on a second. I think I'm on the wrong.
Yeah, there's one up front.
There are two properties.
There's two.
There's two.
There's two of them. Thank you. Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, there we go. Thank you, Jen.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's the other one.
So there are two properties in the downtown core that is being proposed to have the zoning change to be conforming with the rest of the downtown core. Is anyone opposed to that change? Okay. Next item.
Okay, number 9, again, we discussed this when you looked at the local coastal program. These properties down here are very small, and most of them are zoned residential medium and are basically completely built out with a single family home on them. Some of them have a duplex, and some of them have quadruplexes. The proposal here is to rezone this to residential high. I don't know what kind of impact it'll have, but that's what we proposed before during the review of the local coastal program, and the commission said yes, they wanted to see that, so it's reflected here.
Is anyone concerned with our prior recommendation? Go ahead, Matt.
I would make the same suggestion I made earlier, that this could be commercial mixed, and it would sort of fit in with the surrounding commercial mixed and the plaza, and you could still have street activation with some sort of store if people wanted to put one there. But just a thought.
The advantage being to be able to continue to have commercial on the ground floor with residential above?
Yes.
Does staff have an opinion on that proposal?
Not, I guess leaning into some of the changes that you'd need to make in the commercial mixed zoning district, which right now requires some commercial on the ground floor. What that would do to areas that have little potential for, commercial frontage is, prevent their development for higher density housing. And I think we reasoned on these particular sites that, they're really not large enough for, for that. And also many of these are they're in just neighborhood. It's just a neighborhood.
Right. Got it.
So,
not as much potential.
Yeah. So
for
if you wanted to lean into making changes in the commercial mix that allowed for more residential on the ground floor, which staff is actually going to propose, but perhaps on small lots, eliminate the requirement for commercial, then it might work here. Otherwise, I would suggest that you get the same effect by going residential high.
David, couldn't we also at some point say amend the RH to somehow like allow ground floor commercial with a conditional use or something like that?
I think we already did that. I asked for corner stores to be allowed in residential high. So, but yeah, I yeah.
Yes.
So I think that's the alley that I had in mind, right where the arrow is kind of its pointy part. If that whole block should be under one combined ownership, would that public right-of-way remain?
Yes, I believe is a, and I will confirm this and get the information back to you, but I believe this is a city alley, city-owned alley, and so those would remain.
Okay, and so residential high with density bonuses would allow for up to 90 units per acre right now? Is that what we have in mind there?
Roughly, I think that's what we calculated, and I couldn't tell you how many units that would actually put on these particular parcels off the top of my head.
Okay, Peter?
Does Jolly Giant Creek go through here?
I don't know off the top of my head if it goes under those parcels.
Let's, I'd like to see a show of hands in favor of making a change from residential medium to residential high for this area. In favor? Passes. Let's move on to the next exhibit.
Sounds good, and I think that Jolly Giant Creek does not go under those parcels. Number 10 is basically Uniontown and a little sliver of holdover. These are the residential medium parcels on the south here. Excuse me.
Like south of CVS?
Yeah, just behind CVS. Might be able to see it better on these.
Like right up against the wall of CVS, literally behind.
Yeah, between CVS and Samoa.
Yeah. So here's these parcels here, and then these parcels here. So this is the same. We just discussed the residential medium parcels over here going to residential high. This just couldn't fit on that same exhibit. So it's the same concept. These small parcels out here are zone residential medium. They could be redeveloped with higher densities if you went to residential high.
Anyone concerned about that change to RH there?
You know, right now, the area by Uniontown, I think it probably does make a good deal of sense to change that to commercial mixed, especially since the state's going to allow construction of housing in that giant parking lot anyway. And so we might as well be able to set standards for it. But when you're talking about the area to the south, have we gotten to that area yet?
Yeah, that's in Exhibit 10 as well. It's the residential medium density parcels that are just south of Uniontown.
Okay, so they are zoned residential medium now. There is still a great deal of single-story, family housing in there. That area has not yet been developed to the full potential of its lower zoning, and so I don't see any rush to rezone those to residential high. At this point, that's not saying that it couldn't be done at some point in the future, but we still don't have anything near the full use of that residential medium designation. So I would hold off on that.
Okay, does anyone else have a question or concern about the change from RM to RH in Exhibit 10?
Is the proposed change both the entire Uniontown Shopping Center and this neighborhood in one fell swoop? Is that the idea? Is that your idea?
Yeah, so Uniontown would be rezoned from commercial general to commercial mixed. Ultimately, that would be the new designation, commercial mixed. And then the parcels that are south of Uniontown, which are currently designated residential medium, would be redesignated to residential high and ultimately rezoned to residential high.
I thought, sorry, that you included that little sliver of those parcels in beige at the top of your map with the Uniontown.
I think north of 5th Street is incorporated in the change from CG to, yeah.
Yep,
Mm-hmm.
yep. And I'm all for that. And I can go along with Judith on, we could hit pause on that neighborhood because it's already residential medium and that's not really happening as what's been pointed out.
No, I think I would offer that it is happening. Residential medium is happening here, and there's several parcels on the southern edge here in particular that, you know, have the potential for additional development if development potential were higher. The other thing that you can consider in this is that the proposal is to increase the density of residential medium, and so that might accomplish the same goal.
Can you say that again? What was that last proposal, David?
In the land use element, all of the zoning districts are increasing their density, their base density. And so right now, this is residential medium and you're allowed to build up to 15 units per acre. But in the future, with that change in the land use element, I believe it's, I want to say it's 35 units per acre. I'd have to look it up. I don't know off the top of my head, but it's much higher density in the residential medium zoning district. So you, without changing anything other, except what you're changing in the land use element, you get higher development potential here to begin with.
Okay, and when will that associated change take place and affect the increased density potential?
It's happening in this same review. So those changes to the land use designation allowable densities are happening simultaneous with the changes in designations, and that'll all be approved at the same time with the general plan updates.
Can you show Exhibit 10 then, just a little, or the exhibit in totality? So what you're saying then is if we make the change north of 5th Street to commercial mixed and keep everything south of 5th Street in residential medium, we will be effectively increasing the density anyways in both portions of that.
Yes, just not as much.
Okay.
Yeah.
Judith?
Yeah, I'd also like to point out, in addition to effectively increasing the density by changing what residential medium means, with density bonuses for affordable housing and a number of other things, we're further increasing the density. Whereas if we change it to residential high, we've got that 90 units per acre again on what are now extremely narrow streets with a kind of a weird little street pattern. And we still have a bunch of single family houses there. And I feel like we haven't, in a sense, fully utilized the residential medium designation. Why are we in a rush to change it to residential high
Got
in
it.
that little weird pocket?
Peter, go ahead, Peter.
People don't have to build very dense buildings there if they don't want to, but boy, we have a housing crisis, and I don't see a downside to making the change to residential high here. It gives the opportunity to build a more dense neighborhood if possible, and we need it.
Matt?
I agree with Peter. I don't agree with the logic of we shouldn't upzone until we fully built out an area. I think that the housing crisis, you know, this is walkable to downtown, so it's like a prime location for more people to be able to live. And so I would be in favor of residential high.
Joel?
Yeah, I agree. I think that also sends a message out there to anyone who's paying attention that, you know, Arcata wants to build housing.
Go buy one of those single-family homes right now. Sell it big.
I'm in favor of that change to RH, really on consideration as well. So let's make that proposed change as it lands and move on to Exhibit 11. Dan, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, is there a little bit of cleanup that we can do on those parcels that are north of 5th Street? Is there any moving them into the commercial mixed? Or is that not appropriate because they're presently single-family residential?
I think it's definitely doable. There's kind of like a hard break in the way that the Uniontown Shopping Center was built, which I think was why we, and because of the existing developments on that side, but there's no reason why you couldn't make that break if you wanted. I think it's totally possible. So you're suggesting make these commercial mixed. So this is one large block of commercial mixed.
Yeah, or at least put it out there to the owners of the property that that's an option. I don't know how that communication goes back and forth between you and they and us, but it just looks wrong the way it is right now.
Yeah, I think it's largely just because that's, you know, again, this is the legacy that we've adopted, and we can clean those up, you know, where it makes sense. So, you know, certainly if that's what the commission wants to do, we can make that change.
I agree with Dan.
And how many exhibits do we have more to go through, David?
We're getting close to the end. We've got, excluding the gateway, we've got, you know, 14 total, but I think the rest of these should be pretty quick. Exhibit 11, it's the parcels that are on the frontage of Samoa Boulevard. Here's Little Lakes over here. Here's where the on-ramp is for the highway, so just the parcels there, moving them from commercial general to commercial mixed should be, I would think, non-controversial.
And the mini storage. Judith?
That is potentially putting new residential development in an area that is potentially very much subject to rising groundwater and possible all those coastal hazards. I think that the commercial general designation allows for business development, commercial mixed, which could allow for new residential development in a risky zone, could potentially be putting people needlessly in harm's way.
Other concerns or comments about that Exhibit 11 shift from CG to CM?
Because south of Samoa is in the coastal zone, there would be another level of review of this zoning change when the zoning ordinance happens.
Yeah, yes, absolutely. In fact, this change you'd see this change both in our standard zoning code as well as in our local coastal program. This area also is in the zone, the area that we're intending to defend for as long as possible, the sort of protection zone, where most of the area within the coastal zone is not. We are disincentivizing new residential development in this area. This is definitely, on the margin, on the fringe. So I think, Commissioner Mayer raises a valid point. We feel like this is, something that would be viable for, 45 to, 75, 100 years, in that current condition.
My vote is hit the pause button on that one.
Dan's saying hit the pause button on that change. Joel?
I am concerned about sea level rise as much as I would like to vote in favor of upzoning these a bit. I'm not sure it's wise to do so at this time.
Yeah.
Go
ahead, David.
I was just going to mention that, with these, and I think it's reasonable to have a longer discussion about this. I want the commission to be really comfortable with this change. But, if your thinking is, well, these areas are in the mapped vulnerable zone, and so, the properties on the south side of Samoa are going to be inundated with tidal, waters. I guess I would offer that impact isn't going to stop at Samoa. If we have tidal waters lapping at the south side of Samoa, they're lapping on the north side of Samoa as well, and there's a whole host of additional impacts that are happening at that point, and infrastructure that needs to be built to protect that area. This is a new composition of commissioners from when we've had the discussions around sea level rise before. So I would suggest, yeah, if you have concerns, let's move on to the next one.
I was just going to ask, if a development were to occur there, wouldn't it have to go through an analysis of how it's built vis-a-vis sea level rise? Under
current permitting, yes. And certainly, I don't expect that to change with the Coastal Commission anytime soon. These areas are in the categorical exclusion area, I believe. And so, but we would have to demonstrate some sort of sea level rise resilience and adaptation program overall. I think for these, for this area in general, the strategy has been to try and incentivize, appropriate reinvestment in this area so that we can do things like clean up the scrap yards, and, recognizing that we are going to, enhance the, protections around these areas for, as long as it's reasonable to do so. But again, a much more lengthy conversation than we can have tonight.
Given the fact that the city's working to disincentivize new building in this area, why is the city, given that, pushing this change to CM?
Yeah, okay, so two things: not disincentivizing new development and not pushing for change. We're bringing these forwards for community conversation. The intent is, in particular in this area, between South G and H streets and out, along the southern edge where you see the pink, this whole area, the idea is to try and incentivize development, that we want to see people invest in those areas. We just want to shift the ways that they're investing. The piece that we want to disincentivize is new housing development, in particular new high-density housing development in areas that are subject to sea level rise. So I think that's a really good conversation to have at another time, so we can potentially get through the rest of this map.
So let's move on to the next one and pause on this, not approve that.
Okay, Exhibit 12 is, again, a residential medium zone parcel. This owner is interested in doing more development under the current zoning. They can't. This is another one where if you wanted to leave this at residential medium and rely on the additional development potential under the new density, that's perfectly appropriate option for this property. The owner's not looking to, blow it up and, build 4 or 5 story buildings. They just want to be able to add a couple more units. This is off of Bayside Road. Here's the Murphy's. So it's just the apartment complex. It's just off of Crescent. So either rely on the underlying changes in density or change this to residential high is the recommendation. I can show you where it's at.
Go ahead, Judith.
I'd rely on the underlying changes to that residential medium density right now. The only way to really take advantage of a residential high density designation would be to actually demolish some of the buildings that are already there. Residential medium would already allow them to build in the parking lots. It would allow them to build in the corners. That's actually relatively new, pretty good housing. And I think that if the owner really wants to build out some more, there's still potential on that site to do a little bit of it, but residential high, to take advantage of that would actually involve some substantial demolition of housing that's already there, and which is pretty good housing.
Joel?
If the property owner came forward with a proposal for some, really dense project that exceeded whatever the then existing land use designation was for that property, he or she could also come forward with a proposal to change the zoning map, to change the land use classification.
Sounds like you're...
Well, yeah, I'm kind of on the fence on this one.
What's the downside of making this change now? I don't see it.
Okay, a vote in favor. Matt?
Yeah, I guess I'm curious about the surrounding residential medium and why you wouldn't also just change all of it. Why just this one? It feels very honed in on one particular property owner in a way that I don't know it needs to be.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. And if the commission wanted to expand this, there's area within the coastal zone that's also residential medium. And then this going up the road here is also residential medium. Those are actually developed out. So here's the subject parcel that we're discussing. Going up the road here, you can see that this is in no way, shape, or form residential medium, in terms of its actual build out. So certainly you could, upzone it. I think the idea here was that the, this is already right on the street. There's sufficient, access and all that kind of stuff to support higher density of development. You could probably make that same argument for downslope getting into here. The challenges you start running into downslope here are, setbacks from ESHA, but there's probably some development potential in here. So I guess if I were to, make a snap recommendation, I would say, yeah, include all of this. If you're going to upzone, this probably isn't going to have an impact. You could rezone it if you want to, but I don't think the owners have the desire to change it.
Judith?
This particular rezone to residential high will be a gift to that particular landlord. The city will be giving that landlord the opportunity to make millions of dollars in one fell swoop, in effect by destroying perfectly good housing in the meantime. When that developer has a plan to build residential high density housing, hopefully affordable to somebody, that landowner can come to the city and ask for a specific rezone for a specific project, which we can then review. And in the meantime, residential medium is providing a lot of really good housing to people who appreciate that location now.
I mean, I think I think, I'm not saying you're wrong, but I think that's a slippery slope of a way for us to look at projects that we're going to approve or not. I mean, I think the same thing could be said for the Gateway area, and anytime we're either making a change or not making a change, I think it's very difficult for us to take into account in any meaningful way the impact financially on the people that own those parcels. I think the better focus for our thought, our analysis is it an appropriate way to help add housing in the town? And for me, I disregard, though I don't disagree, whether that's a financial impact, because there's always going to be a financial impact. And I just don't see that that's an effective metric by which to look at a project.
This is also a classic case of spot zoning, which in planning terms is something that we don't recommend. It's not surrounded by high density zoning. It would be the only property with high density zoning in that area. It is the definition of spot zoning.
How about we take a vote and see where the rest of the commission lands on this? Dan, where are you landing on this?
I appreciate the point about spot zoning, and I support that notion that it seems unusual to just choose this one parcel in that area. And I like sistering whatever happens with parcels across the way. However, this residential medium increased density stuff that's coming down the pike seems like it might provide exactly what this guy wants to do anyway. And I like the idea of him coming to us if he really wants, if he has a project in mind. So I'm with Judith on that.
Joel?
I agree with Dan and Judith. I think RM could potentially give the property owner sufficient density, and if it doesn't, he could come here and come to the city and ask for more.
I'm going to agree with that. So let's hold off on that change to RH.
Okay. And I just wanted to go back to 11 real quick, because Jennifer just pointed out to me that there was an additional change that I didn't catch on here. This is a split zone property that has industrial limited on the frontage, and then natural resources zoning on the back part here. And I believe the split zoning was related to a concern at some point in the past about, protecting wetlands on that site. It's not really appropriate to try and protect wetlands by adding a spot zoned natural resources area. And so we would suggest changing this all to industrial limited, and allowing the wetland protections that we have embedded in both the cities and the coastal commission's permitting purview to protect those wetlands.
Can you show that to us on
yeah, on the map?
The aerial photo, yeah.
Yeah. It's this property right here. Here's Front Street. And this is the subject property. Here's the mini storage. This parcel here is zoned industrial limited. This parcel in the back is zoned natural resources. And I don't think that this dividing line follows the contour of a natural feature. I can guarantee you it doesn't. And so what we're suggesting is that you rezone this to industrial limited to match with the industrial limited zoning here. And then when this owner comes out to develop this site, we would just ask for a wetland delineation, develop appropriate protections, but then allow them to use their property for those industrial limited purposes otherwise.
Any concerns by the commission about clearing that up? Judith?
I was on Front Street a few days ago. It was flooded. It was very wet. I think if I were going to rezone this area, I would rezone it all for natural resources rather than take that back portion and rezone it for industrial use. So I would vote not to rezone this until the landowner comes and asks for it.
They actually have asked for it. they haven't made formal application. I mean, I think that, I get the, the appeals to, we're giving things away to property owners. When we're making a major rezone like this, it's a great opportunity to help facilitate the kinds of development in our community that we want to see. If we don't want to see the kinds of development that go along with industrial limited zoning on this property, then yeah, we should rezone it to something else. If we do, then we should rezone it to industrial limited. The developer is willing and wanting to develop this, and so providing this opportunity for them seems to make sense from a community development standpoint.
Matt?
So my understanding is the sea level rise adaptation strategy is to sort of permit uses that will be movable, right? And so industrial limited to me is like that kind of use and won't have the same level of environmental contamination as a higher industrial. I guess is that the
what kind of uses are we envisioning under IL?
I think what they're hoping to do is to create more of the, sort of small to medium-sized shop spaces that you see in the South G Street area. So they would, develop sort of spec build models where they'd create the shell, and then, folks could come in and lease them and then improve them and, conduct their business in them. We've heard from, for years that there's a huge demand for that type of shop space. For folks that can't afford to purchase something but still want to operate in Arcata.
Like the folks that just lost shop space at Craftsman's Mall and could in the future be migrating out of areas of the Gateway, depending on how that
correct
moves forward.
Good point.
I'm for this. I just feel like looking at the surroundings. The city now owns the parcel next door. Is that correct? From there to the freeway.
No, this land is owned by Ray Christie. Which?
Well, I don't know. Isn't the city in negotiation on most of that there, or?
We've had some conversations with this property owner. We do not own any of this. Yeah.
All right.
Okay. So
yes,
vote in
I'm
favor.
Yes.
Peter, Matt, Joel.
Okay. Okay, this one is hopefully pretty straightforward. We have, let me move to the exhibit because you can't really see it from this gross perspective.
Was that behind the school, approximately?
So this is this is near Sunnybray. There are parcels along the road here that are currently zoned residential very low density. They don't meet the parcel size standard for residential low density, and most of these are developed to a standard of residential low density, and so we're suggesting we just recognize that existing condition.
Any concerns by the commission? Judith?
So then these parcels could, under SB 9, also be subdivided right off the bat, pretty much?
Yeah, I think that they could be subdivided under SB 9 in their current configuration as well.
Under their current configuration as well?
Yeah, under their current zoning and land use designation.
So that's not a meaningful change, in other words.
I mean, I'd have to go parcel by parcel and evaluate the criteria, but I believe these parcels are small enough to where they would satisfy the requirements for an SB 9 rezone, lot split rather.
In favor? Passes.
Okay, we are getting, I think we have one more. This one is on Old Arcata Road. This is currently public facilities, and the proposal was to rezone it for residential very low density. This is a parcel that is owned by the Arcata Fire District. They have since asked that we not make this change at this time. And so I think because this is in a little bit of flux, I would love to get your impressions as to whether, if the landowner is wanting to change this to residential very low density, would you as a commission recommend it? And then that'll give me some insights to help share with them in case they change their mind.
Can we see the streetscape of where that parcel is?
Yep.
Please.
The best, most likely other alternative would just be residential low, not very low, right?
I'm sorry, yeah, residential very low it could work. Some of these parcels over here are residential very low, but I think these are residential low adjoining it. Oh, I'm sorry. Totally misspoke. I was thinking the ag residential. So these are residential very low adjoining, and so this public facility is recommended to go to residential very low.
I'm still not clear what exactly is there.
Yeah, so it's this property right here. Here's Old Arcata Road. There's the school up there. Here's Anderson, and there's just this vacant parcel with the weird building.
And is the farm just in there somewhere?
Yeah. I'm sorry, this is the farm, not the school. The school's right here.
And the fire district owns that?
Fire district owns this.
Yeah, I know right where you're talking about. And they, so you're asking us not to change it, but to give you our opinion of if a change was requested, what would we think?
Yeah, go ahead and make your recommendation for change. They may ultimately say, no, we don't want that change. We want to retain it as public facilities. And so I'd love to hear from you, your recommendation on whether you're okay with it either being public facilities and potentially a fire station at some point, or residential very low and potentially a house at some point.
So the presumption is the reason they don't want to change it is to maintain the ability to put another fire station there?
Correct. And
the staff is clearly not concerned about that as a limiting factor, or maybe?
That's its current proposed use and allowable use.
There's no reason we wouldn't support residential very low, would we? I mean, it's surrounded by residential very low.
I can't see why not.
The only reason to not support residential very low is if you were to upzone that area to residential low.
Residential low, yeah.
Peter? I mean, there are a lot of the parcels in that area that are already at that designation, or at those development standards, not at the designation. Sorry.
Peter?
Are there any plans for a fire station there? I mean, are we impeding that?
I think one of the things that has come up, just to peel back the curtain a little bit, in our discussions with the fire department in Cal Poly, as we've been discussing, growth in our area and in the outside the city of Arcata and the fire district at large, there's a lot going on in McKinleyville as well. One of the areas that we're honing in on is, trying to study the fire district's future needs. And so I think because of that, they may want to hold on to this parcel and evaluate whether it makes sense to have, fire station, south here, as the population grows and as development happens. So previous to these conversations, I think they were thinking they're not going to need a fire station there, so they might as well sell it to somebody who could use it for housing. And so I think that's just where they're sort of starting to, try and keep the options open for potential for a small station down there that would be able to, deploy to areas south.
But it's a pretty low impact decision, because whatever we say, it's still going to come back for us to make the actual change, because we're not making a change right now anyways, correct?
Correct, yeah. So I guess ideal situation for the fire district would be for you to say, yeah, we're comfortable making a recommendation for either.
Does anyone have a concern about making this hypothetical change at some hypothetical point in the future?
I think it's ridiculous to make hypothetical recommendations at this point, and if we do need to change the zoning there, we can do it later on. This is clearly a case where we had a request from a public facility owner to consider a change, which was then withdrawn, and so I don't even think we should be talking about it right here.
Peter? Matt?
I agree. We should just leave it alone.
Let's leave it.
So just to clarify, leave it as residential low, or leave it as public facilities?
Leave it as public facilities,
Okay.
and if they actually want to make a change and come back to us, we'll consider it. Okay, so that gets us to the end of that. And we are at 8:40. So I'd like to close this item and thank everyone for the work we got through this evening. Moving on to correspondence and communications. Do we have any correspondence from Planning Commission members this evening? Peter.
I will miss the next meeting. Hopefully I'll be high in the mountains.
Got it. Judith.
I will miss the next 2 meetings, and I'd like to clarify, since these are all special meetings, my understanding is that also doesn't impact the maximum 3 missed meetings in a calendar year for commissioners. Is that correct? And if you want it to, I would suggest taking a good look at Lisa Brown's suggestion that we go back to not special meetings, in which case when I miss the next 2 meetings, that only gives me 1 more meeting before I'm off the commission.
You're correct. If you miss special meetings, it doesn't count towards your attendance.
Go ahead, Dan, sorry.
Yeah, there was a handout of an alternative route through the gateway that I would really like to see, and I'm just supporting the idea of that getting disseminated if possible.
Yeah, we will add it to the materials that were handed out at the meeting. Unfortunately, I only have 1 copy, which isn't enough to distribute to all the commissioners and the public. And so I will add that into the record, let you know when that's done.
Do we have any correspondence from staff this evening? All right, there being no further business, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everyone.